The pandemic and the pause and then shutdown of some comic shops and shipping is going to affect comics forever. I think we were wondering how big of an impact it would have. I think the signs are pretty clear at this point that there is going to be a pretty sizable impact and change to comics. And in some cases, it's a wholesale change. In some cases, it's an acceleration of what was happening anyway. But let's talk about that. Hey everybody, this is Perch. When the so it's going to be interesting to look at this in about 3 years or so, and to kind of assess back what happened and why it happened. I think this is going to happen for a lot of businesses where people point to the pandemic as a turning point for how businesses operate, how certain products achieve. And I think it's a mix of some things accelerated a demise, like generally the changing of retail definitely has been accelerated by the pandemic. And I also think if we're in full prediction town, I think that the ultimate breakup and antitrust and other problems with Amazon, people point to it at this exact moment where Amazon has benefited quite a bit from the pandemic and shops being shut down and people being stuck at home. Their business has really blossomed. And I think that's irritated a good number of people. I think it's also shown into sharp focus exactly how much control they exactly had in the industry. And I think that we'll look back on. I mean, there's absolutely going to be antitrust hearings and some other problems. And like the telecoms back in the day, I think the reality is Amazon getting broken up it's a foregone conclusion. It's just a matter of when, in my belief anyway. But with comics, there's a couple of things that I think went on. And I think now that we're, a few months into it, the comic companies have in theory gotten back on their feet. We've seen, DC kind of trying to do some different things, Marvel doing different things, kind of the indies, the effects on IDW and others. We can basically take a couple things away from it. The first is that comic retail, the direct market and the distribution channel, Diamond, was always extremely fragile and at risk of disruption. And that disruption has hit now to where Diamond is on the ropes and is going to have to struggle to maintain its position. It's not going to maintain its position as a monopoly, as a dominated force anymore. It's going to have to actually invest time into competing, and we will see if the lazy dog can get back up into shape and actually compete. That remains to be seen. We've seen that retail overall, which was suffering from just brick and mortar businesses not doing the best, definitely this has been a big blow to them. And any comic shop that's been wholly dependent on comics to sell, particular new comics, is going away. And comic shops have accelerated a little bit into that kind of nostalgia business. I think people who are big back issue curators and those kinds of shops won't necessarily like to be described that way, but it's like a place that sells vinyl records or any kind of nostalgic legacy product. It's going to draw a certain audience, people trying to reconnect to a certain part in their life. And it's not going to draw kind of a new immersion audience. It's going to draw a legacy audience. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means that some shops are going to be certainly better equipped to do that than others. And it also means that comic books kind of solidly establish themselves as not a mainstream product, but a legacy product. And I just said a bunch of things there that probably a number of people disagreed with, but I think that the direct market comic shop, any illusions, I don't know who had this illusion, but any illusions that it could, grow and we could see national chains and all that kind of stuff, that's over. That's not going to happen. Certainly not with that business alone. As a nostalgia, as a pop culture place, sure, I do think we'll see the hot topic of comics kind of emerge as as a repeatable, either franchisable or at least national business that can come out that sells a bunch of these, kind of like fireworks and those kinds of shops that you see sometimes in the mall. I think that's definitely a possibility. Or a merger into those shops is also another one. I heard that there's a shop, Box Lunch. If you've heard of a shop called Box Lunch, they kind of sell pop culture and nostalgia kind of products. And reportedly, they're going to start carrying comics. And I think that makes sense, I think that will further tip the market into that kind of area. But that's a change that was coming anyway that we got accelerated in. The change that I don't think people are expecting is the general fragile nature of comics, meaning the lack of money in editorial and creative and how comics are made. That general lack of funding, I think, helped tip over, basically the viability of this business. So for people who were not well established, who are kind of living hand to mouth, who were picking up jobs based on kind of networks or buddies, that's coming to an end, and that's going to take a little bit longer for it to kind of fully roll out. But if the scandals and the pencils down and pencils up and then all the rest of that stuff, if that didn't make one thing completely clear, it's that these companies, as they mature and kind of establish whatever ongoing business they're going to have, the days of kind of you kind of nuzzling up to some comic pro in a convention and that becomes your entry into the business and you can kind of just skate along with minimal talent, but you know the right people, that's going to get harder and harder to do. Not impossible. Those jobs are still going to be there and that network will still exist, but it's going to shrink quite a bit. I think you can see the writing on the wall at this point with DC and with Marvel that you're going to have to bring a little bit more, and there's going to be more controls over just kind of who you know or who you met at a place and kind of what things get brought in. I'm sure there will still be some publishers that will operate that way, but they're just going to get smaller. They're not going to grow. They're going to be very, very, you're going to be a big fish in a tiny pond. And I think what you will see happen is some of the people who are, I want to say mid-level talents, people that didn't necessarily get well established at DC or Marvel or with their own creator-owned kind of empires, those people are going to migrate to the humanoids or the Oni or the Booms. Well, maybe not Boom's actually in a decent spot, but the Xenoscopes, the Vaults, that kind of group. You're going to see big creators, one, maybe two, migrate to those, have pretty low base salary, but they'll get to be king over that little empire. But it will be a little empire. It's not going to be an expanding business. I think the big question mark for comics as it relates to this pandemic is how viable longer term are monthly comics. I don't think monthly comics are going away, but I do think it's a foregone conclusion that the volume of monthly comics, the idea that 120 to 150 comics every week hitting shops, those days are coming to a definite end. There's no tail for that. I'm sorry, not a month. I don't know, a week. A week would be madness, but a month, that's just not going to happen. You're going to see that the weekly or monthly comics are going to be the big kind of all access kind of books that can appeal to a wider audience. It will go that direction, and the rest is going to be done with kind of a off shipping schedule like what Saga did, or with trades, or with kind of OGNs, and that's how it's going to work. I think the comics that come into a comic shop is going to be lower than 20 and probably be sitting around that 20 to 25 range at most relatively soon. I think within a year or so, I think that's kind of how things are going to work. It'll be interesting to see the numbers as they come out, both of Death Metal and all of Marvel's events, to see what exactly they can pull, particularly with the tie-ins and the crossovers and all that. But I think there's more and more evidence to suggest that this business just can't sustain a high volume of ongoing comics. It's the money is not there, the attention is not there. It's going to go in a different place. But I think that we're in a period of transition for comics. We said this before this pandemic hit, that we were probably overdue or right at the place where there's going to be a big sea change in kind of the people who ran the big companies and how the big companies themselves operated and how comics are consumed and how it all fits in with the market. A bunch of people from Mike Millar. Mike Millar. What am I saying? Anyway, there were a bunch of people speculating this was coming. I think there's plenty of evidence now to say that it has come, the change is upon us, and that the pandemic in many cases hastened things along, and I think distracted people. I think there's a lot of folks who are not necessarily seeing the change that has taken place because it's, we're distracted. We're locked in our house. We got the threat of a virus. A lot of things are up in the air. Everything feels shaky and fragile, and so we're missing some of the day to day. If it was more normal times, I think we would have, basically be looking at this entire situation with a lot more alarm or a lot more notice. But a lot's flying under the radar right now. But that's what I think is happening. I think we're upon it. What do you think? Leave a comment below of the things you're seeing, where you think comics are at. Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter or Facebook, on any social media platform. And thanks for listening.